Hey, welcome back, everyone. So back here, finally home again, at least for now. And there's some big stories going on. Right now, of course, there are these riots taking place, and there have been National Guards troops fired at, injured, it seems, by other means, not by getting fired at, but these do seem to be related. Maybe it was one of was, I believe, broken glass, and the injuries of the other person were not made clear. But you have National Guards troops getting attacked right now in much the same way that police were getting attacked in the riots last year. But compare this to what's happening as well with the narrative around the Capitol riots, riots, quote unquote, where people didn't have guns, didn't burn anything down, didn't really destroy that much, didn't really commit much violence other than four people died through health issues, one person shot by a Capitol police member who doesn't seem to be getting investigated. Well, it's quite a different narrative, quite a different story, right? We're going to be talking about that, talking about what's happening in the post-rule of law society. We're maybe entering to some degree right now. We're also be talking about the rising murder rates, what's happening in the U.S., going into gun restrictions, what Biden's doing with this, using these narratives, and talking a bit about where maybe the real issue of violence is coming from. When, of course, they emptied out the prisons, when, of course, they've been causing different issues such as that have been increasing the crime rates while using the crime rates at the same time to feed broader narratives. And so that said, folks, a lot to talk about tonight. And that said as well, great to see you all here. Yeah, Reno Tron, great to see you. Thank you. Hey, Jam Glitter Cell Stories, good to see you. Thank you. Hey, Prima61, hola, good to see you. Thank you. Shannon Haney. Yeah, it's escalated quick. Yeah, tell me about it, right? Yeah, good to see you all here. Jack Delaney, Maria Anderson. Yeah, thanks, everyone. All right, folks, as always, let's go to the first story for the night. And in the meantime, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. I'll try to get to them. Go over a few stories first. Now, first of all, talk about what's happening with Black Lives Matter riots. Epoch Times reports shots fired at National Guard troops in Minneapolis, 2 injured. Now, it doesn't appear that they were injured by the gunshots, but by incidents related to it. Let's go into this. Epoch Times reports some members of the Minnesota National Guard came under gunfire in Minneapolis on April 18th in the midst of riots, looting, and protests that had followed last week's shooting death of Daunte Wright, officials said. 2 suffered minor injuries. The National Guard Minneapolis Police neighborhood security team was fired upon early Sunday morning in a drive-by shooting near Penn Avenue and Broadway in Minneapolis, the Guard wrote in a tweet. In another tweet, the Guard said the shooting took place around 4 a.m. local time when a light-colored SUV approached and someone inside fired several shots at a security team providing neighborhood security. No team members were seriously injured, the account wrote, adding in a separate post that 2 members received minor injuries. It said one guardsman sustained an injury from shattered glass, requiring additional care, and was taken to a local hospital to receive treatment. The other guardsman received only superficial injuries, the post said. Now, imagine if this happened, say, during the Capitol protests. And what's happening right now? Did you see the post where Maxine Waters came out and was saying that they need to be more extreme, essentially? That they need to go even further with their protests, that they weren't being confrontational enough, as she alleges. Imagine if Trump had told the protesters, when you already have riots, right? Imagine if you had riots and Trump tells people, you need to be more confrontational, right? They're already burning things down. They're already looting. He says, you need to be more confrontational, and then people go and do a drive-by shooting on National Guards troops. What do you think the narrative would be if that happened? That's what's happening right now, only the sides are flipped. It was Maxine Waters encouraging it, and the Democrats really encouraging this type of action, and also the mainstream media pushing this type of action. Imagine if the tables were turned, what the narrative would be. And why is it that these things aren't being condemned, right? The condemnations have been typically on the other side. They're condemning the police for, of course, officer-involved shootings, each of which has a longer story behind it. You can't just take it as a broad stroke picture to try to define what happened with each one. But again, that's what they're doing right now. right? They're taking incidents and painting using broad brush strokes to paint a meta narrative that does not reflect really the narrative on the ground, right? The narrative when it affects, let's say, the details of what actually happened in each case, and at the same time feeding the fires, fanning the flames, encouraging people to be even more extreme, leading to things like this. And what happens when someone gets shot? The narrative flips to the other side. They start talking about gun control. They start talking about the race of the individual. If it was a white person who was shot, typically swept under the rug, or it's need for more gun control. If it's a person of any other race getting shot, then it's a race narrative issue. This is just where things are at in terms of the narrative war. Now, folks, let's go into a bit more of what's happening right now. I want to talk about there's another story in Epoch Times. It's Derek Chauvin, a post-rule of law society. Now, this is a commentary by William Wagner. He's a columnist, or he's writing for the Epoch Times. And great analysis here. I want to go over that just a bit, and then we'll go into some more stories. But it says here, right, this is an analysis, commentary piece. It says, a year ago, America exploded in protests and riots after George Floyd died after being arrested by police in Minneapolis. Now, this is another incident not necessarily related to the other protests. Of course, another officer-involved shooting. But this is the one that mostly triggered the protests last year, the protests and riots last year. Of course, the officer is on trial right now, Derek Chauvin, for allegedly killing George Floyd. And it's coming out now that he probably didn't actually kill him. He probably died of a drug overdose, which a lot of people already assumed anyways, but the corporate media wouldn't tell you this. Now it says, today the officer who held Floyd's head to the ground with his knees sits on trial, but what many expected to be an open and shut case has been complicated by evidence that Floyd had dangerous levels of drugs in his system and other contributing health problems. Close observers to the proceedings are now contemplating the possibility of former officer Derek Chauvin's acquittal and how the public will respond. This places a special burden of responsibility on everyone involved to try to minimize the prospect of widespread violence. Unfortunately, whether the national news media, nor cultural influencers, nor many political leaders are rising to the occasion. Coverage by major news outlets has largely amounted to cheering for the prosecution, so lopsided as to resemble a chess match in which only only one player's captures are announced. Now it continues a bit further down, stating this. A typical CNN headline on April 10th read, "In Chauvin trial, defense has slender reed to cling to." New York Times reported that a Floyd friend was, quote, trying to avoid testifying, but they did not mention the fact that this friend had also been identified in previous testimony as Floyd's suspected drug dealer. And again, he had lethal levels of fentanyl in his system. It continues, Newsweek ran an opinion piece literally headlined, "Does Derek Chauvin deserve a fair trial?" And it notes that fortunately the author's answer turned out to be yes, but how did that even become a question in the first place? What's happening right now? The media are not giving people the full story. And so despite the fact that the prosecution is happening right now, despite the fact that he's on trial right now, this police officer who doesn't appear to have actually killed George Floyd, it appears, again, it was drugs very likely that killed George Floyd. This police officer is on trial, and the media is refusing to show the full picture, refusing to show the real picture of evidence being shown at the trial. So what does that mean? It means that anybody following the story who is using big corporate media believes that they probably believe the officer is going to be acquitted. They probably believe that the officer is going to be put in prison. They probably believe this officer is going to spend a very long time in prison and face charges, again, for the killing of George Floyd. And what's going to happen when the evidence shows otherwise and the officer is acquitted, he's set free? People are going to be shocked by what happened, and very likely they're going to riot across the United States because they've been fed false stories, false information by the same media and political machine, again, that tries to blame the other side for doing the same thing, right? How many people have you seen have these stories that Again, false narratives about voter fraud led to the January 6th Capitol siege, and Trump was inciting riots and inciting all these other things, and that all the deaths are on his hands. Meanwhile, you have media literally lying to people, actually lying to people, politicians lying to people, politicians telling people to be more extreme in their actions, actual violence being carried out against even officers and against National Guardsmen. And where are the voices condemning that? It's the opposite, right? It's the opposite. They're refusing to cover the real story of what's happening. And while refusing to cover it, they're misleading people so that people are more likely to carry out riots, to protest, to loot, to rob, to murder. That is where things are at with this story. And so again, real double narrative happening right now. Yeah, Marvelous Marvel. He said, "Hi, Joshua. Do you think there are more shootings or just more reporting on them?" Well, murder rates are up. I'm going to go into that in just a bit, but the murder rates are being caused by other issues, and I think this is I'll go into this in just a bit. But really, yes, murder rates are going way up. This happens after different governors and mayors released prisoners from prison, emptied out the prisons, right? It comes after different mayors and local city councils and so on are defunding police. It comes after you have politicians actually calling on people to be more extreme in their actions, right? It comes amidst all of this, where in other words, government has created a crisis. And while creating a crisis, are using the ensuing violence from the crisis they created to try to push a narrative that you have an uptick in white supremacy and an uptick in shootings caused by people having guns in the first place. Not the fact that they emptied out the prisons, not the fact that they're encouraging violence, not the fact that they defunded the police that can stop violence from taking place, right? They dismantle their systems of law enforcement. They dismantle their systems of justice. And when violence takes place, they use that to push additional narratives that give them more power. That's what's happening right now. Now, we'll go into that in just a bit. But first off, I mentioned before, Crossroads is totally demonetized. But luckily, folks, again, and that's why we don't have super chat. That's why we don't have advertisements on this show. Totally demonetized currently. We're trying to get it back, but no luck so far. But in the meantime, we do have sponsors. And tonight's episode is brought to you by Shen Yun Dancer. And Shen Yun Dancer apparel is markedly different from what's trendy today. Now, this is a Taiwanese clothing company not tied to the Chinese Communist Party in any way. In fact, the Chinese Communist Party really, really doesn't like them because they're restoring a lot of the culture the Chinese Communist Party tried to destroy. Fantastic company. Shen Yun itself is wonderful. And every feature when it comes to the clothes, including the fabric, color palette, style, and cut, bears the distinct aesthetic of Shen Yun. Shen Yun Dancer clothing provides men with a classy, distinguished, and timeless look. Great for everything from the office to the street. Take their polo, for example. While most polos are great for either the golf course or a backyard party, they might not be dressy enough for the office. Shen Yun Dancer makes a comfortable and versatile long-sleeve polo in a classic cut. Woven trim in the cuffs and collar add a classic finish to a shirt designed to impress. Now, I have a couple of these, and I can say they are actually very, very good shirts. You can visit shenyundancer.com and get 10% off your first order by using the promo code JOSH10. And again, big thanks out to Shen Yun Dancer for helping sponsor this show. Now, folks, I want to go into questions in a bit, but let's talk first about what's happening with the murder rate, the crime rate in this country, the actual violence on the street, the shootings, and what's actually really probably causing this. Because really, if we look at the real data and the real information coming out, it does not align with the narrative. The narrative being fed to us right now does not align with the actual data coming out. Let's explain. Epoch Times reports murders rose 56% in major U.S. cities amid defunding push. In other words, the defunding police push is causing the rise in crime. That same rise in crime being used to justify things like gun grabs, being used to justify taking away legal immunity from gun manufacturers, being used to justify additional measures to track people who own legal firearms. It is the defunding police movement that is causing this uptick in violence, according to the data. Real quick, Michael Little, you said please spell your sponsor's name. That's Shen Yun Dancer, Shenyun Dancer. But back on the story, Epoch Times reports this. We'll go over it. I'll explain a bit of what's happening. Epoch Times reports murders spiked in major American cities since the death of George Floyd amid a push to slash police funding, according to a new analysis. The rise in homicides in 10 major cities last year coincided with police making fewer arrests and stops, the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund found. In other words, folks, that uptick in violence we're seeing, this narrative being used of, Asian hate crimes and crazy people shooting people on the street, right? That coincides directly with police not being able to carry out arrests because they're either afraid they're going to face trial and face murder charges, like this officer is right now as we speak, because they've lost their funding, because they've been giving stand-down orders by the local politicians, because local politicians emptied out the prisons in some places, right? These are the contributing factors to that. But the ensuing violence is being used to push political narratives. That's what's happening. And what happens again, right? Now, you have to imagine every person who is the target of violence is part of a certain race, and every person carrying out the violence is also part of a certain race. Now, what happens if your average person is, say, shot on the street, right? Normal shootings, right? If it's against a white person, it's just a shooting. And this justifies the need for, for example, the need for, let's say, taking away guns, or the need for more programs locally to defund the police. If it's a black person shot, then it's defund the police. If it's a white person shot, then it's gun grabs. If it's an Asian person attacked or so on, then it's Asian hate crime and white supremacy. That's how the narrative is being pushed. Not the fact that local governments dismantled the systems of law enforcement that have caused this problem to happen. Right? The actual cause is the dismantling of law enforcement by the politicians who are pushing those narratives. Now, it goes into just a bit more. It says the rise in homicides, again, is tied to this. And it says in Chicago, for example, arrests and stops dropped by 53%, while murders rose 65% when comparing June 2019 through February 2020 and June 2020 through February 21. In Minneapolis, during the same time period, arrests and stops decreased by 42%, while murders increased by 64%. Chicago cut approximately $59 million from police in its 2021 budget, largely by axing vacant positions in the force. Minneapolis, which slashed $7.8 million from its police department in December 2020, approved an infusion of money a month prior and backed away from one proposal to increase the number of police officers and another to entirely dismantle the department. And at the same time as this, we'll go over one more story, and then we'll go deeper into it. Epoch Times reports this. It says LA sheriff blames defund the police and progressive policies for spike in violent crime. It says violent crime has soared in Los Angeles County this year because criminals have been emboldened by progressive law enforcement policies as well as the defund the police movement, the county's sheriff says. Los Angeles County Sheriff Alex Villanueva said the county recorded 60 homicides during the first 2 months of the year, compared to 21 in the earlier time frame. He told Fox News this in an interview, and he specifically blamed a new Los Angeles County District Attorney, George Gascon, a Democrat who was elected to lead the nation's largest prosecutorial office in December 2020, amid the widespread unrest and calls to defund the police, following the death of George Floyd while in Minneapolis police custody. Now, what happens if you have, say, law enforcement in place to discourage people from committing crimes, and suddenly you eliminate the interest of police in stopping crimes from taking place, right? You eliminate stop and frisk like they did in New York. You eliminate, for example, the prosecution of, say, people based on race if, for example, they're part of a large-scale riot, or if you have Antifa protesting on the street. How many people actually face charges? Not that many of them, right? Look at the riots last year. You had people, you had hot mics, right? Police communications being told allegedly to stand down. You had different areas where police were told to not prosecute crimes, to not arrest people. You had police saying that they were told to stand down in some of these areas. What happens when criminals no longer believe they're going to be arrested if they commit a crime? What happens if people no longer feel they're going to be investigated if they commit a crime? What happens when you have, again, people looting, burning down buildings, even sometimes killing people on the streets during these riots? And not only are they not targeted, right? Not only, how many people have you seen prosecuted for that, right? Not only are they not being targeted, not only do you not have large-scale investigations into the people who have committed crimes, a lot of these people, even when arrested, are let go, right? They're given bail because you have celebrities doing large-scale funding projects and big corporations doing large-scale funding projects to pay for them to get out of jail. And so how do you have a dismantling of our entire system of law enforcement, a dismantling of our system of justice, right? All this tied together. And then what do you expect? Well, you're probably going to have more violence. You're probably going to have more crime. And what does government do, right? Rather than say, okay, we should restore rule of law. We should, for example, give police more budget to take care of the problems, which was Trump's approach, right? Trump's approach when you had the riots and so on and people calling for racial equality and reforming the police, what did Trump do? He gave them more money for training and other programs. The new focus is defund the police, take away their budgets. And now that we have large-scale violence, what's happening? Politicians are using the violence to push for additional progressive measures. They are using the violence to feed their own narratives. They're using the violence to advance their political agendas. They are using the violence, the same violence that they created through these types of policies. This is classic above and below tactics. Classic tactics. Great book on this, in fact. I mention it frequently. The Shadow Party. It's the Shadow Party, how George Soros, Hillary Clinton, and 60s radicals seized control of the Democratic Party. Fantastic book. Now, it talks specifically about the above and below tactic. And what do? Basically, you do this. Now, keep in mind, when you have individuals like Soros, for example, who finance every layer of an issue, right? You get behind political parties, you get behind candidates, and you give money to them, right? You finance candidates, meaning that when they get into power, you have some sway over them. You can advise them to address a certain issue which you think is a big deal, right? At the same time, you finance grassroots movements. You finance the people carrying out the protests on the streets, right? And so if you control both the top and the bottom, right, you can manufacture incidents, even if you don't control the media itself. The media responds to it. And so what do? You have the grassroots movement carry out a protest, carry out a riot, carry out some, even going in front of a building and picketing or attacking people on Twitter, right? You can have them do that. Organizations financed by that same individual, right? Hypothetically in this case, right? Individuals, movements financed by them, you have them hold a protest, hold a riot, picket, make angry comments on Twitter, you name it. And then what do? You tell the government official who is also on it that this is an agenda we're trying to push. This is an issue that needs to be addressed. And what happens? They go to their podium and they give a public speech about it, or they just write about it on Twitter or release a press statement. And then what happens? And keep in mind, a lot of politicians, a lot of them, this is just how politics works, unfortunately, in the US. It's their teams that do most of this, right? It's their teams that do most of the policy, or think tanks that write a lot of the policy. And so you present an issue for them to promote, they promote it, and then what happens? Media report on it. Local officials says that there's violence on the streets and the solution is to defund the police because this is the political issue being pushed by the person financing the grassroots. Government responds to it. Media reacts to it. Media writes a story. Can we defund the police? What's the narrative on this, right? And then they start pushing for that. Government then uses that to respond by making measures to change things. And what do? They start defunding the police. And then what happens? The actual problems on the grassroots level become worse. Crime goes up. Violence goes up. Things like this increase. And then what happens? The grassroots movement and people on the ground start saying, wow, we actually do have a problem on the ground. Wow, I feel unsafe when I go outside. Maybe we do need to reform something. And then what happens? Political faction responds to it again, writes something, grassroots responds to it and corrects the direction on it. Make sure that it's heading down the direction they want it to go down. Making sure the agenda that they're being financed to push, right? That they're being financed to push is the way that things are heading. Government responds to it, media responds to it, media starts interviewing people on the ground, and before you know it, you have a national issue. You have something part of the national discussion, when in reality, it's been manufactured. That's how a lot of things happen. A lot of issues happen this way. All right, this is the above and below tactic. Again, not some hidden secret. This is just how it works. Yeah, Shannon Haney, you said Hegelian dialectic. That's exactly what it is. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? Incident or issue, counteracting issue, and then solution to it, essentially. All right? That every incident moving along a track, right? Every incident moving along a track has different issues interfering with it, and there's finally, in the end of it, an outcome. How do you interfere in a process in motion to manipulate what the outcome is? How do you change the direction of social issues to have it arrive at the outcome you want it to arrive at? That's what happens with these things. Yeah, this is exactly what we're watching right now. And again, the narratives don't line up with the facts. So who's pushing the narratives, right? When the narratives don't line up with the facts, who's pushing the narratives? And who created the problem in the first place? All right, folks, let's jump into a few questions. Actually, let me go one more thing, because I want to talk about this just real quick, because it ties in what we're talking about. Then we'll go into questions. But what's this being used for right now? Part of it, defund the police and gun restrictions. And Epoch Times reports this. Biden is now saying Congress must pass gun control bills after Indianapolis FedEx shooting. It says, President Joe Biden on Friday condemned a deadly shooting at a FedEx facility in Indianapolis and again called for the passage of gun control laws in Congress. The president called the shooting, which left 8 people dead, the latest in a string of tragedies involving guns, and ordered flags to be flown at half-mast at the White House and other federal facilities. Biden said that it is up to Congress to act on gun laws, including several bills that have already been passed in the House of Representatives. And in addition to this, they're also saying this. The White House is saying Congress should end immunity for gun manufacturers. This is another story here. It says, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said Friday that Congress needs to act to end immunity for gun manufacturers and restrict so-called assault weapons. Again, political term, assault weapon. There's no such thing as an assault weapon. Coming after a shooting in Indianapolis on Thursday. And they said, like all of you, we are horrified by the shooting. And they said again, Psaki told us to White House briefing and said, we can't afford to wait as innocent lives are taken. There's more we can do and must do. She added that the Senate should take up and pass 3 bills passed by the House of Representatives to strengthen background checks, and Congress should act to end immunity for gun manufacturers and deal with, quote, assault weapons. Now, I'll have to see what happens with this. A few of you mentioned like Fast and Furious, right? We're under the Obama administration. The U.S. government was actually selling guns to gangs, right? Bit funny, right? What do we have happening here? Now, a few things. They're talking about, again, eliminating legal protections for gun manufacturers. So manufacturing weapons then becomes, something that can get you thrown in prison, possibly, or at the very least sued endlessly. And it's going to be complicated. I spoke to some people about this, guys who work on the legal side of gun issues. They said it's going to be hard to do because, well, where else do people sell guns? Where do most gun manufacturers get a lot of their money? Well, not in the U.S. maybe, but a lot of countries. Where do they get a lot of their money? Selling it to military, selling it to law enforcement, selling it to armed guards. And so if you're going to have a military, law enforcement, and armed guards, you need to have gun manufacturers. What they're talking about here is eliminating the sale of guns to the public. And what does this mean? It means not getting rid of guns. This doesn't mean getting rid of guns. They don't want to get rid of guns. They want to get rid of your ability to own a gun. They want to have the police still armed. They want to have their armed guards still armed. They want to have the thousands of officers, thousands of troops protecting them in Washington armed with guns, but they don't want you having guns. That's the real story. They don't want to get rid of guns. They want to regulate who can have a gun. And the regulation ends again with the people, we the people, not having guns, and our all-powerful government having all the weapons. Right? That's the way it's heading at. They don't want to get rid of guns. They want to eliminate they want to regulate who can have them. And who can have them in the end? Government, people who protect government, and that's it. Right? Not the average citizen. Which is the situation in a lot of places as well. Yeah. So that's where things are heading with that. But at the same time, there's some other stuff happening right now. In Texas, for example, the House gave initial approval to no permit carry bill. And it says the Texas House on Thursday gave initial approval to a bill that would allow Texans to carry handguns without a permit or training. And in some parts of the U.S., I believe Arizona, did it. Almost positive Arizona. They've made it a gun sanctuary city. Gun sanctuary state in this case. And so what's going to happen? Federal government's pushing for things that technically violate the Constitution, depending how you interpret it, right? Federal government pushing for things to regulate firearms shall not be infringed. It's being infringed, right? Federal government's doing that. Local states are saying not on my watch, and local states are creating their gun sanctuary states. And so local governments, local mayors, local cities, they're putting in different laws to protect Americans' ability to own guns. And so you're going to see a lot of pushback against this. This is just the beginning. It's just now starting. Now, let's go into a few questions, and then we'll go into some more stories for the night. So first off, this is Redeemed Patriot. You said, what is the military definition when the government cannot govern itself? Yeah. What is the military definition of when the government cannot govern itself? Seems to be very similar to where we're at now, right? Pappy Chulo, you said, are you moving to Frank? I'm sure you all saw the news that the pillow guy, Mike Lindell, he's announced his own new social media, which is going to be, well, we talked about it before, but it's a mixture of Twitter and YouTube, and it should be launching tomorrow. We'll see how it launches. And if it works out well, maybe we'll move there too. We'll have to see how it goes. But of course, we'll keep the broadcast here as well. And also some other stuff in the works. Hopefully some big announcements soon. Hint, hint, right? Just wait. Some big announcements soon, folks. This is from Edmund F. Cool. Yeah, the third. You said spiritual nutrition masteris. Oh, Master, so that's your name. You said, is there any evidence of Project Blue Team? To be honest, I haven't heard of Project Blue Team. I've had a few different things floated by me in terms of rumors of what's happening behind the scenes. To be honest, I haven't followed those too closely. I will look into Project Blue Team, though. Project Blue Beam, I'm sorry. I will look into it. I'm not familiar with it. Next question from Marvelous Marvel. You said, hi, Joshua. Do you think there are more shootings or just more reporting on them? More shootings and more narrative twists that deviate from the facts of what's actually happening, right? The suppression of the actual news story and the creation of narratives being used to push political agendas. That's what's happening. That again, as we mentioned, government created the crisis, right? Government creates the crisis through bad policy. Defund the police, release prisoners from prison, and then disenfranchise officers from enforcing the law because they're afraid they might get thrown in prison for enforcing the law, right? You make it so that police are demoralized. You demoralize the police don't enforce the law, people commit more crimes. What do you expect? Right? What do you expect? And then what happens? Government responds to the ensuing crisis, crimes going up. What is the solution? Not to reverse the bad policies they created, but to instead regulate things that affect law-abiding citizens, to increase regulation on law-abiding citizens, and to promote, again, race narratives tied to whatever race each individual involved in whatever crime may be happens to be. You know, if it's a white guy who commits the crime, it's automatically white supremacy. And then the victim, depending on the color of the skin of the victim, becomes narrative for whatever race they tend to be part of, right? They can manipulate it all over the place. But again, it's just a narrative. These are empty narratives being pushed by the same people who caused the crisis in the first place through, again, bad policy. Policy, if you look at the data as we went over, there's a direct correlation between the bad policy and the uptick in crime. And they're not putting this together as the real narrative. They want you to debate within the boundaries of their established narratives. They want you to debate on those things, but that's not where the discussion is, right? The discussion's on politicians wrecking our legal system, wrecking our systems of justice, and then using that to push for the agendas they want to push for. That's what's happening. Let's see. Jack, you said, where is Trump? We cover some stories on Trump here and there. It seems that he's more working behind the scenes still. And so he's backing different campaigns of different politicians who are running for re-election in 2022 and for some of the new candidates running for election in 2022. Trump, again, his main issue right now is to retake the House and the Senate for Republicans. And at the same time as that, he's going to make his debut. Apparently, they've been hinting for a long time once he announces this new social media. Now, there's a possibility, pure speculations, take it for what it's worth, there's a possibility the new social media might be Frank, the one that Mike Lindell is announcing and the one that it's supposed to release tomorrow. Possible that Trump may use that. He was allegedly in discussion with Parler before to have some part in that, and who knows what happened behind the scenes. It didn't play out. And so either Frank or his own platform. Very likely once Trump chooses the platform he wants to go public on, that's when he's going to make his public debut again, as people close to him have suggested previously. Until that time, Trump's working behind the scenes, and that's his focus. Tony Goza, he said, what do governments do when they take away your guns? Whatever they want. Yeah, and that's true. In fact, most genocides we've seen over the last 100 years tend to happen after government seizes everyone's firearms. Usually, right, as history would show us, usually genocide is preceded by gun grabs. Take Nazi Germany, for example, right? That's what the Nazis did. During the Weimar Republic, you had these gun registration drives. Everybody's gun has to be registered, right? And then what happens? The Nazis take over and they use the gun registrations to go and seize everyone's firearms. Then what happens? Anybody who could resist does not have the means to do so because they seized all the firearms. Same thing happened with a lot of these genocides we've seen take place over again the last 100 years. They're almost always preceded by gun grabs. Cuba, for example, China, for example. I mean, the list goes on and on. Almost every case, that's what happens. And just as an example of this, folks. Now, if we were to go back, imagine, go get a bit sci-fi with me. Imagine he had a platoon of Marines, just guys with, M16s or whatever, whatever guns they might have, right? Automatic rifles. Let's say they have, unlimited ammunition. They have boxes of ammunition. And they were to go back in time and fight, say, an army of Spartans or something like that. How many, well, maybe Roman legionnaires, let's say that. How much damage do you think a single platoon of Marines could do against an unconventional, against an ancient army with swords and spears and bows? Probably a lot of damage, right? Now, what happens when you have a group of Marines, a platoon size, let's say, for example, against a populace that doesn't have any weapons? No guns, no swords, no spears, no shields, none of that, right? Well, guess what? That's what happens when you have a disarmed republic, when the public has been disarmed. People have no means to defend themselves. And this is why in some countries, like the Janjaweed in Sudan and such like that, you can have 20 guys in pickup trucks who can conquer a whole country. You can have 20 guys in pickup trucks slaughter entire villages like you had happening with ISIS. That's all it takes. And if government doesn't step in, or even worse, government encourages it, what do you think is going to happen? If people no longer have the means to defend themselves, they lose the right to self-defense, something protected in just about every system of law going back to, hundreds or thousands of years, right? The right to self-defense, right? This is not a new concept. People have a right to self-defense. Even in like the United Nations law, human rights issues, you're supposed to have the right to self-defense. What happens if you eliminate people's ability of self-defense? Well, guess what? You eliminate the ability to have it, they lose the right to have it, right? Let's see here. This is from Sean Newberry. You said, at what point do you think martial law will be implemented? Well, in some places they already have it. They already have martial law in some places. As we speak in Minneapolis, where these National Guard troops were just fired at in a drive-by shooting, you have partial, well, maybe not martial law because the military hasn't taken over the systems of justice, which they probably don't want to have happen, because if they took over the systems of justice, you might actually have a just system of justice, which doesn't seem to be the agenda right now, right? Government, let's put it this way. I don't think you're going to have martial law, because martial law means the military is going to seize control of the systems of justice. Now, if they were to do internal purges, ideological purges throughout the whole military, and manipulate the ways that law would be determined, well, maybe they'll do it. But unless that were to happen, guess what, folks? You already have people of one set political ideology controlling most of this anyways. They don't need to have control over the systems of justice through military means, because they already have it, right? You have these attorney generals who don't prosecute half the crimes. You have these attorney generals who let people go on bail. You have attorney generals releasing people or not charging people, or not seriously charging people, based on politically correct narratives, not on the basis of traditional justice. You already have that to an extent. And they're using military as the strong arm in some cases, as the protection for the officials who are worried about the chaos they themselves created. Right? They don't need to have martial law, in my opinion. This is from Weedad Kalali. He said, how is today's happening compared to the 1992 LA riots after Rodney King? I'd say it's similar. It's actually very similar. I'd say the difference between right now and the LA riots in '92, where again Rodney King this individual was beaten by police. The real story is a bit different than the way the media spun it. People then didn't have cell phones, right? People then didn't have Twitter. They didn't have social media. They didn't have ways to post videos of what was happening on the ground. You didn't have, let's say, large numbers of independent media who could deviate from the narratives, right, the established narratives, and really show you the real story of what's taking place. You didn't have this. And so the ability for people to challenge the established narrative was actually very limited during that time. But on the ground, you did have the issue that there were these riots, right? Some people were condemning them. Some people were saying the riots are symbolic of a deeper social problem that we need to regulate and create new regulations for in order to resolve, right? The manipulation of a crisis, the manipulation of people's suffering to push a political agenda, oftentimes being fed again by the same politicians who created the crisis in the first place. So in that regard, I'd say it's kind of similar, but situation's also a lot different. This is from Jenny Overspeed. He said, Josh, what's with all the parliament I hear press secretary talking about? I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't know the context of that. Let's see. All right, folks, I'm getting a note here from my producer, and I can finally announce it. Now, I've been messing with y'all for a while, and no, not messing. I've been hinting at y'all for a while that something big is coming, right? That we're working on something. I've mentioned we are totally demonetized by YouTube and been facing a lot of issues with that. Well, folks, we now have the solution. We've created our own platform. It's called Epoch TV. And we're going to be launching that hopefully this week. There we go. Check it out. So, folks, get ready for Epoch TV. We're looking at a subscription model. I'm not sure the exact amount, but it's going to be subscription based and not that much. But using you with this, folks, very quickly, even with just a fraction of the audience we've had on YouTube, we can very quickly make up for everything we lost on YouTube. And this is something they cannot censor. They cannot censor this. So, folks, get ready. Epoch TV is now launching. And so if you want, please check it out. Well, I think we're launching it this week, hopefully. We'll have to see. The plan is this week, unless there are issues that block us from doing so. Should be this week. And so I'll keep you all updated on the link to it. But this is now happening, folks. I've been kind of teasing you with it for a while. Actually, no, you can find it online already. It's theepochtimes.com, TheEpochTimes.com/Epoch TV, EPOCH TV. And it's happening, folks. We cannot be censored any longer. And again, our model, to make sure they can't censor us, it's subscription-based. And so, folks, please support us. I believe it's $5 a month. I'm hoping I'm right because I don't want to say it wrong. I believe it's $5 a month. Price of a cup of coffee, and you support us, bringing you independent journalism that cannot be censored. So here it is, folks. Yeah. All right, let's go into a few more questions, and then we'll jump into some more news stories. Let's see if we can post the link up. Can we post the link? Can we pin the link to the top? 1 sec. Yeah, maybe my producer can pin the link to the top. Regardless, I'll get that to you. If not tonight, then another night. Yeah, it's happening, folks. No more censorship. We're taking a stand against censorship. You don't need a cable. You don't need cable to see it. This is online. And again, we're working on some more stuff, and so keep you all updated. This is happening now. All right, folks. Next up, we have. This is from Christina Urso. You said, yeah, how come all those shootings are happening now? Why we don't see this during the Trump administration? Yeah, well, it's again because they created the crisis for it. Lizzie is asking, drink of the night. Actually, I'm drinking a flavored tea tonight. I normally don't drink flavored teas, but I'm drinking a flavored tea. It's one I got in Florida. It's like a lemon black tea. It's quite nice. Let's see now. Is from Patrick Gertie. He said, Josh, where do we go now? What's the end game? Next step is 2022. And leading up to 2022 is the narrative battle. We're about to see, folks, a real battle for narratives. You're going to be watching this. All right, this is again, all right. This is again just my analysis. Take it for what it's worth. This is where I see things happening. 2022 is just around the corner, right? 2022 is just around the corner. It's the state legislatures that really determine local election law. I think the narrative, folks, I'd say don't worry about feeling like your vote's not going to count. I really do think that's going to be a big focus from now until 2022, pushes to maintain voter integrity. Most of the places where Republicans can even win, right, are places where you have Republican state legislatures anyways. And those places typically are looking to reform things and make sure what happened in 2020 doesn't happen again. The focus of the Trump administration, the Trump team, right, 45office.com, the focus of them is to get behind different political campaigns, to get behind different candidates, push them forward, back them, finance them, and so on. Do all that, right? And again, right, this comes down to the narrative battle. What are we going to see very, very soon, I would say? As soon as Trump makes his debut, it's going to be on a new platform. Who knows what it'll be, whether it's Frank under Mike Lindell or whether it's his own new social media platform. We're not really giving clear answers on this, but it's very likely going to be one of the two. Once that happens, where do things go? You're going to have Trump pushing for, again, different candidates. You're going to have Trump campaigning for them. You're going to have Trump rallies. You're going to have political rallies for every candidate. You're going to have an alternative platform coming about very soon, Epoch TV being one of them. A lot of independent media are doing similar things actually as well. independent platforms, alternative ways of getting news out, bypassing again the Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, whole system of doing things. And as Trump releases his social media, as Mike Lindell releases his, unless Trump goes to Mike Lindell's, which is a possibility, that means independent infrastructure. Independent infrastructure means possibly websites hosting their businesses on there. That means as well ad networks. Ad networks means independent businesses, not afraid of cancel culture, getting behind them, which means people being able to come back and start their own channels and financing their own channels. And then what happens? You're going to have two infrastructures. You're going to have the establishment, and you're going to have the free world, right? It's going to be freedom. It's going to be freedom versus socialism. That's where the narrative is going to be. And this is the upcoming narrative battle this whole country and probably the whole world is going to be swept up in very, very soon. I'm guessing within the next 2 months-ish. As soon as that happens, we're going to see this battle of narratives. And not just a battle of narratives, but a battle of these, say, for the business side of these rival institutions. And keep in mind, even the political parties aren't what they used to be, right? The Democratic Party is no longer the Democratic Party of Bill Clinton even, right? And the Republican Party isn't either. Because again, the establishment, including even the Bush Republicans, went to the Democrats. The Republican Party is no longer the Republican Party as we knew it after Trump. It's now the Trump Party. You have the Patriot Party and you have the Establishment Party. Those are the two parties we have in the country. And now that it's entering the grassroots and it's entering the business realm through these new platforms where people are getting information out, you're going to watch this, let's say, freedom versus socialism battle, or this establishment versus patriots battle enter into the business landscape and into the deeper narrative landscape. Get ready, folks. Right? This is my analysis, again. But get ready, I guarantee this is going to hit within the next 2 months. This is where things are happening. That's the next step. And as that happens, you're also going to see different states choosing their sides in the U.S. Already Texas and already Arizona and already Florida are going in their own directions. What are you seeing as they open up, as they reopen the economies? You're seeing virus cases go down. Florida reported the lowest number of cases they've had since this whole crisis has been going on. And again, that's after totally opening. You're going to have your freedom states, your patriot states, and you're going to have your establishment states. This battle of narrative, that's where things are heading. It's going to be manifested on the political level, manifested on the narrative level, manifested on the corporate level, and manifested at the state level. That's the direction things are heading on. And after that, who knows? 2022 is going to decide the next step, but that's where things are heading until at least the elections for the House and the Senate in 2022, at least in the U.S. And I guarantee you as well, this narrative battle, this whole issue is going to be global. It's not just going to be the U.S. because what happens here is going to ripple out to the whole world. Guarantee it. All right, folks, let's go into a few more stories for the night. Epoch Times reports is talking about the drug crisis in the U.S. It says San Francisco overdose deaths far outpaced COVID-19 deaths in 2020. It says here, nearly 3 times as many people died from accidental drug overdoses in San Francisco in 2020 than from the CCP virus, according to preliminary data released by the city's office of the chief medical examiner. A total of 713 people died from drug overdoses in the city in 2020, compared to 255 who died from the CCP virus, commonly known as the novel coronavirus. Now, if we're having a health crisis that justifies killing businesses, that justifies locking people down, that justifies seizing your rights, that justifies rewriting our election codes, the foundation of this country, that justifies locking people up, telling you have to wear masks, that justifies lockdowns and travel mandates where if you travel, you have to, again, quarantine and so on, right? That's a crisis. 255 people died from the virus in San Francisco, but close to, or more, right around 3 times as many died from drug overdoses in San Francisco. And so is the drug overdose thing being treated with 3 times the amount of intensity and focus and concern by politicians? No, right? It's being fed by them. What do you have instead? Instead of saying, let's stop the drug crisis, what are they doing? They're saying free syringes. They're saying open borders. Let's let the people trafficking drugs into the country more easily. Are they calling out the Chinese Communist Party for sending fentanyl into America? Are they increasing border security to make sure drugs are not being trafficked across our border in the same way they're managing the ability of freedom of movement of the average citizen who's been in lockdown for the past, year plus? No. Why is that? Right? Why are they doing it then? Right? The narratives don't line up with the facts. And so what's really going on? If the narrative is untrue, then what is really going on? Why are they doing it? Right? Related story here. Let's talk about it. On the border crisis, Biden is saying a surge in illegal immigration along the border is now a crisis. He's acknowledging it's a crisis. What is the solution to the crisis? He will increase the refugee cap. Let's go into it, and then I'll give my analysis. Epoch Times reports, President Joe Biden has for the first time described the recent surge of illegal immigrants along the U.S.-Mexico border as a crisis in the midst of Republican-led pressure to do so. Over the weekend, Biden was asked by a reporter in Delaware about his policy on refugee admissions. And he said, quote, "We're going to increase the number," again, and that's of refugees allowed into the country. And he said the problem was that the refugee part was working on the crisis that ended up on the border with young people. What? He said the problem was that the refugee part was working on the crisis that ended up on the border with young people. Right? Biden said it. And then he said, quote, "We couldn't do two things at once, but now we're going to increase the number." So increasing the number is the solution to overwhelming numbers of people coming across our border illegally. Now, folks, what's causing the border crisis? Well, maybe it's because New York City is going to give people who are illegal aliens $15,000, depending on their circumstances, for the past year and being out of work. Maybe it's because they're offering people thousands upon thousands of dollars to come here illegally. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe it's the fact that Biden stopped the building of the border wall. Maybe it's the fact that Biden made it so that states, right? Remember we had the issue in Texas where they were challenging that states can't actually deport people. Maybe it's because they created different financial incentives, for example, giving people stimuluses. Maybe it's because, again, they've made it so that people who are here on refugee status or asylum status, right? If they come here for asylum, they're held in the United States, meaning they come here, they apply for asylum, and they're released into the interior of the United States. They're allowed to enter the United States and probably never come back again because they don't have to give their real names, because the databases for that are held by ICE, and police can't actually work with ICE in sanctuary states. Maybe that's part of it. And so what's the solution? Increase the incentives for coming here. Do you think increasing the incentives for coming here is going to end the crisis? Or do you think it's going to make the crisis worse? Right? That's the policy. And again, folks, this is happening, as previous data showed, 10% to 50% of the people coming across the border have the virus, the CCP virus. And again, happening as well where people in different states, such as New York City, which is a sanctuary city, say New York City is, again, a sanctuary city, and where if you or I travel to New York City, at least for a while, you have to quarantine for 2 weeks. But you can illegally immigrate there, even if the numbers show 10 to 50% of the people illegally going there have the virus. They don't have to quarantine. Now, do the narratives align with the facts? Again, or is there a discrepancy here? And if there's a discrepancy, then what is the real narrative? What is the accurate narrative? If there's a discrepancy, again, if the facts and the claims and the public statements are not actually aligning with the real information, right? If the narratives and public statements aren't aligning with the real information, then what is the real information, right? Then what is the true narrative? Why are they actually doing it? All right, your guess is as good as mine, right, at this point. But let's go into one more story, and then we'll call it tonight because it's getting a bit late. Now, as we have protests sweeping across the United States, And there are people, again, calling for equality, and not even equality, they're calling for equity now. They want to have equal outcome, meaning that regardless of how much work you put in, the result is the same. What you get out of it in the end is the same. No matter how much more you work, no matter what happens, you get the same outcome. Equality of outcome. And of course, the people pushing this have mentioned previously, some of them, that they are trained Marxists. They are Marxists pushing for a Marxist agenda. And so they represent, again, the impoverished, right? The people who need help. But as always is the case with communist leaders, people who seem to believe in that, like limousine liberals, as they oftentimes call them, you now have one of the leaders of Black Lives Matter getting called out for having multi-million-dollar homes and multiple homes, that apparently equity does not apply to the people pushing the agendas. And it says here, and in addition to this, what is the reaction? Is the public outraged about it? Not only is that not happening, you have social media trying to erase the stories. They're trying to delete the stories. They're trying to make sure you can't see them. Epoch Times reports Facebook and Instagram block users from sharing New York Post report on BLM co-founders' multi-million-dollar property purchases. It says here, Facebook and Instagram are censoring users from sharing a New York Post report regarding the luxury homes purchased by Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrisse Cullors in predominantly white neighborhoods, ironically. Why did she choose white neighborhoods, right? The article was published on April 10th and states that Cullors had purchased 4 high-end homes for $3.2 million in the United States since 2016. Since what happened? Since BLM has been pushing for these riots across the U.S. since Trump came into office. Now, she had also looked into purchasing a residence in the Bahamas at an ultra-exclusive resort where Justin Timberlake and Tiger Woods both have homes, according to the reports. The Post learned that the apartments and townhouses at the beachfront Albany Resort outside Nassau run from $5 million to $20 million. Facebook users noticed on Thursday that they could not share the link to the Post article or on Cullors' multi-million-dollar property portfolio directly on their timeline or through the Messenger app. You couldn't write it in their timeline. You couldn't even message the article to your friends or family. They're restricting your ability to communicate with friends and family to send them an article link, right? Not because the article is fake, but because the narrative very likely doesn't fit what they're pushing, right? It says, again, when a user attempts to share the link, they are blocked from doing so, and the following message is displayed. It says this: your post couldn't be shared because this link goes against our community standards. Why does it go against community standards? Does it go against community standards because it's false? No, not even according to their own statement, right? Does it go against their community standards because it's pushing a narrative they don't like? Wow. It seems that they would have no problem doing it to the other side, so we could assume that may be part of it. And it says also, if you think this doesn't go against our community standards, let us know. If you think this doesn't go against our community standards, let us know. What does that mean? It means it's a vague policy, to the extent that their own policy doesn't necessarily encompass the technical facts of what might or might not have been violated. It's actually how Chinese Communist Party censorship works. They intentionally make it vague in China because it incentivizes people to over-censor themselves. It incentivizes over-censorship, right? Because you're trying to anticipate what might get censored and what might not get censored. And so, my opinion on this, my take is, look, if people want to buy expensive homes, so be it. I have no problem with people making profits and so on. But the issue here is the hypocrisy. The issue here is as well is what the money that people have been giving to these individuals, to believing that they're fighting for against racial injustice and pushing for equity, that individuals are taking that money and spending the multi-million-dollar homes. Now, in my opinion, better to spend it on multi-million-dollar homes than riots on the streets and burning down our cities and murdering people and looting stores. I'd say it's better they spend the money on multi-million-dollar homes than on, again, pushing for riots and so on. But again, all right, the hypocrisy is out there, and what's happening, social media is trying to make it so that you cannot see the story, right? They're trying to make it so that people can't even see the story. And so when accurate information comes out, they don't want you to. Why is that? Why is it, right? Maybe it's because they have a broader agenda they're trying to push. In fact, James O'Keefe's recent revelations with CNN support that analysis, right? James O'Keefe, of course, Project Veritas, they had undercover reporters go into CNN, and one of the individuals they had on camera admitted on camera to an undercover journalist, right, that they are intentionally manipulating information. They even called it propaganda, manipulating information to push for agendas, including, for example, the race agenda. Why are they doing this? It's because crisis, regardless of whether the crisis reflects the truth, well, or let's say there is a crisis, right? The question is what caused the crisis? What's the narrative being pushed as a solution to the crisis, and what is the outcome of that crisis? Is what you've mentioned previously, Hegelian dialectics, right? Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Crisis, solution to the crisis, outcome of the crisis. We have a crisis. What's the real cause of the crisis? As we've mentioned tonight, right? The real cause of the crisis, most of these things, is not what they claim it is. The real cause of the crisis appears to be government interventionist policy, i.e. socialism light, causing more problems, exacerbating problems, right? Which then causes people to react. The same people who created the crisis react to it, pushing for, creating a narrative to, move the public along with it, to make them believe they support it. And then through the narrative control, put in other things as a solution to the crisis that give the same guy who created the whole thing more power over the average citizen. Crisis, solution, synthesis, right? Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Where things are heading. All right, folks, that said, it's getting late, and so we'll call it a night. But again, Epoch TV coming out soon, and so keep an eye out for it. We'll let you all know the details on it. Hopefully launching this week. Luis Delaney, yeah. Say hi from Texas. Good to see you. And folks, always a pleasure talking with y'all. Always a pleasure being able to have this platform. And soon, folks, we're going to have a new platform that cannot be censored. We'll still keep this channel for as long as we're able to, but we now have a platform they cannot censor. That's going to be Epoch TV. Now, folks, as always enjoy talking with all of you. There's a link too. We have it in the chat. Always enjoy talking with all of you. Really enjoy this. And that said as well, as always, folks, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.